Hello everybody and welcome to another video, and as you can no doubt tell by the title of this video, we're going to be looking at Cradle of Filth. Yesterday they released a new track off their upcoming album, Existence is Futile, which is due to be released on the 22nd of October, and I'm really quite looking forward to it. I've been a big fan of Cradle of Filth for a very, very long time. I first heard them when I heard Nocturnal Supremacy off the Vampire EP on a Metal Hammer cover CD in 1996. And I subsequently went out and bought Dusk and Her Embrace, pretty much immediately after hearing the track. And then obviously since then, I've acquired their entire discography. I've gone out and bought every single album. I once even begged my boss to give me an advance on my wages so I could go out and buy Midian. As I say, I've been a long time fan of them, and I do prefer the sort of older stuff, towards the Vampire, Dusk and Her Embrace, and Cruelty and the Beast sort of era of music. I think something about the actual music itself in that era, it was much better. It had a more sort of grandiose feel to it. It had a more some tracks had a more sort of baroque feel to it. I mean, especially Dusk and Her Embrace. I think the music had more depth to it back then, and as they've sort of got further into their career, as they've released more subsequent albums, I feel it's sort of lost a little bit of something in the music, but that's just my personal opinion. And that being said, I still really enjoy all of their music. I think, like, Thornography, for example, was a fantastic album. Damnation in a Day, another really great album. And, this, like I said, this new album, Existence is Futile, this is going to be their first release since 2017, I think, when Cryptoriana came out. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to listening to this track. I'll tell you a little bit of information I know about the album. From what I understand, it is a standard version, is 12 tracks. The track we're listening to is called Crawling King Chaos, which is track 4 off the album. There is a digital and deluxe edition which comes with 2 extra tracks as well. Now having a quick look through, I don't think there's any actual members of the group that I recognise anymore, but then I haven't really paid that much attention to the lineup, because it really it changes so often with Cradle of Filth, but that's as it is. So as I said, we're going to be looking at a track called Crawling King Chaos, which was released yesterday. I have got some lyrics for it, but I don't know how accurate they're going to be, because I do believe they are fan-submitted lyrics. So what we'll do, we'll check out the track. If the lyrics don't match, if they don't sort of line up, we'll just sort of skip those and not bother talking about them. But if they do, happy days. So we'll jump into this track and see what we've got, and talk about it afterwards. So this is Crawling King Chaos by Cradle of Filth. Let's have a look.
Nothing's done to him. shift to chaos. Above this, reach dark office. Above this, seize the goddess. Above this, reach dark office. Above this, seize the goddess. Above this, reach dark office. Above this, lead the public propaganda. The beast is fighting, a counteract the core of everything accelerating. 2 years of preventing war. The beast is fighting, unlit by door. Still down, blitzcraft humanity into the looming overthrow. Scattered with limbs, 6 feet is third. In the necrotic verbal terminus rising to this wild and physical matter of the mountain secret purpose, fire slice the forest black. Opinions flee the monsters, radiation wounded like a bus. Responding violent wall of time, you feel to the need that we never make this time. Fighting bread and United States, no! Above this, reach dark office. Above this, seize the goddess. Above this, reach dark office. Above this, seize the goddess. Above this, reach dark office. Above this, lead the public propaganda. The beast has risen behind the sun. The least is navigated for everything and everyone. The beast has risen, tearing wide the door for a burning footprint on a distant world sending the war. A distant world sending the war.
Well, there you go, Crawling King Chaos by Cradle of Filth. Now, this almost seems to be a step back to their older style of music. You know, I said before, you know, I thought their older style of music had a much grander feel to it. And this seems to be maybe sort of stepping back towards that way from where they've been recently. But it's still missing something. It's not quite there. You know, maybe they're sort of heading back towards, again, probably towards Damnation in a Day, tiptoeing ever closer to Midian with this sort of style. But, you know, back in, you know, like the days of Dusk and Her Embrace, Vampire, Cruelty and the Beast, you know, there was more sort of violin involved in it, and, you know, God knows I love the sound of violins, and that sort of seems to have slowly disappeared over time. But back in those days, you know, violin featured very, very heavily in the music back then. You know, and whilst they do appear to have some sort of strings element in that track, it's more likely coming from the keyboard. Because it, you know, it sounded more like chords, and it sounded more like a, what's the word I'm looking for? Rather than a solo violin, it sounded like it was a collection of violin sounds, or, you know, stringed instrument sounds, you know, a collection rather than just that one singular violin sound that they used to have. But, you know, it's a good track, you know, it's very I would say very typically, Cradle of Filth. You know, once again, Danny performing those vocals extremely well. Back when Cradle came out, I don't think there was another person who could do script that I was aware of, should I say, that could do, you know, the sort of kind of screams that he did, along with a sort of deeper, I would say cleaner, you know, the really sort of deep spoken sort of vocal. I didn't know any other metal act at the time that had quite that range in the vocals and, you know, that sort of upper register scream. You know, I wasn't aware of a band at the time that was like that. Of course, then came bands like Hecate, and you know, I then discovered, should I say, I discovered bands like Hecate and Throne who had that much higher register scream. You know, so that was always a thing of interest for me when I first heard them. You know, is the vocal style was so different from anything I'd heard at the time, and you know, that's something that's remained pretty consistent. He doesn't do as much variation throughout the tracks as he used to do, and there doesn't seem to be as much crisp definition between the styles anymore. I'm not quite sure how to explain what I meant by that. But, you know, if you listen to the way he sings on, for example, Dusk and Her Embrace, and the way he sings on more modern albums, there's a distinct difference how he uses his voice. I mean, obviously, as you get older, these sort of things do get more difficult to do. So maybe it's because of that. I don't know. But, you know, Cradle of Filth have always been, I'm not going to say unique, but they've always been a very interesting band to me because their sound was the first time I'd heard something quite like that. And, you know, I've always been a big fan of it. Now, as I said, I don't know any of the other band members in that band aside from Danny now. Because obviously I came in when you had Nick on the drums and you had John and Paul on the guitars. I know Paul did make a comeback at one point. Can't remember how many albums he stayed for, but then he sort of disappeared again. You know, and there was, I mean, at that point, the keyboards and violins were sort of interchanging because you had Lecter on Cruelty and the Beast, you had Martin on the violins for, I believe he was still on Dusk and Her Embrace up until, I think was he there in Midian? I might have left before Midian, but anyway, you know, the roster of band members of Cradle of Filth change more than any other band I ever known. I mean, I don't think even Megadeth have been through as many band members as Cradle of Filth has, and you know, Dave Mustaine changes band members very, very regularly as well. Seems to be a common practice with most of my favourite bands, except for My Dying Bride. I don't think they've really changed many members at all in the years. But anyway, that's not what we're talking about. Anyway, as is probably usual, this seems like it's going to be another concept album. So trying to derive any actual meaning from a song that comes in, you know, 4 tracks deep in an album is going to be quite difficult. You know, and Cradle of Filth, you know, they very commonly tell stories with their albums, you know, like Dusk and Her Embrace was all about the sort of King Arthur sort of era, and you know, Cruelty and the Beast was all about Elizabeth Bathory, Midian was all about the hidden vampire city, etc. You know, so this is probably going to be a similar sort of thing, telling a story, and like I said, this is the 4th track on the album, so trying to discern any meaning from the actual song would be quite difficult. But from what I can tell, the lyrics that I have were pretty much correct. You know, there might be a couple of very slight deviations for all I know, but for the most part, it sounded pretty accurate. And what I have here are: ravaged are the heavens, 7 angels are deployed, the seals delivered to return us to the void. And waiting on the cusp of many dusks of man, he watches as the masses seek a fake salvation, as he breeds annihilation. Now death is law. Venom dripping from the mouth of madness incites the rites of war. Prepare the heights of empire for the agonizing fall. The beast is rising, enwreathed in flame. The soundtrack bleeds insanity. His theme, the screaming end of days. So, you know, sounds like a pretty apocalyptic sort of thing going on here. I mean, he's talking about breeding annihilation, you know, inciting the rites of war, and his theme is the screaming end of days. So, you Crawling King Chaos, you know, sounds pretty much like the end of days. And it goes, come, Crawling King Chaos, come. Sing his name in rapture, wormwood bitter, spat in tongues, of ancient pandemonia of the ghosts all shall come. Returning to the churning of primordial seas, the order of disorder restored through tribulation, through breed and annihilation. Oh, through this bread annihilation, sorry. The whole world is his church now, a seismic paradigm shift to chaos. Apophis, reach dark office. Apophis sees the goddess. Apophis, reach dark office. Apophis sees the goddess. Apophis, reach dark office. Apophis, be the prophet's propaganda. The beast is rising, a cancer at the core of everything, accelerating to death's apathetic maw. The beast is rising, underlit by gore. Stone tablets crack, humanity. Stone tablets cracked, humanity is doomed to looming horror score. Scatter brittle insects, fate is heard. In necrotic birth of the terminus plague, Satan has fallen, missed the dark waters of earth. Come, Crawling King Chaos, come. Mountains have heave great murmurs. Fires raise the forests black. As billions flee the horsemen, creation wounded staggered back. Again, there's that talk about like the end of days, the apocalypse, you know, as billions flee the horsemen. Clearly a reference to the four horsemen of the apocalypse. So I'm not sure who Apophis is. And Crawling King Chaos is probably another name for this person, Apophis. I probably should have looked that up. Where were we? To expire in the mire, wiped from all time, it will be eternally that we never existed by this bread annihilation. Apophis reach dark office, Apophis sees the goddess. Apophis reach dark office, Apophis sees the goddess. Apophis reach dark office, Apophis be the prophet's propaganda. The beast has risen behind the sun. The least unleashed is Armageddon for everything and everyone. The beast has risen, tearing wide the door for our burning footprint on a cindered world, sinning no more. A cindered world, sinning no more. So, you know, the song is clearly telling a story about the end of days. Let's see if we can find out who Apophis is. Because, like I say, Cradle are always writing. Here we go. Apophis, aside from being an asteroid, says is an ancient Egyptian mythological deity who was the king of chaos. There you go. Apophis is the king of chaos, so Crawling King Chaos, you know, and apparently linked to the end of days, you know. And like I said, Cradle of always ended up telling stories, excuse me, within their albums. And, you know, I've always enjoyed their music. They've always had really good sorts of variation throughout their albums. You know, they have had the odd lemon, you know, despite being, you know, one of my favourite bands. You know, they have had the odd one that's not been that great. But they've always consistently put out great albums, and most of their albums have been pretty lengthy as well, you know. I think album-wise, when it comes to track listing, I think Dusk and Her Embrace possibly has the shortest track listing. Now, I'm not counting Vampire in there, because I think that's only got 8, maybe 10 tracks, but that's classed as an EP. But you look back to... I can't even remember the name of the album now. Principle of Evil Made Flesh. You know, that was their debut album that they sort of put out into the world, and that was a pretty long album. I think that was somewhere around about... I think that must have been something like 13 tracks, maybe more. But they've always been really long really long albums track-wise, and that's a great thing for portraying the story of the track, or of the album, should I say. I mean, Cruelty and the Beast was 12, maybe 13 tracks, I think. So that might be the second shortest. I think Midian was around about 12 to 13 tracks as well. But you go on to things like Damnation in a Day, or Hammer of the Witches, or why can't I think of the names of Cradle albums right now? Because they've even released double albums, because they've had to spread the story out over that amount of time to actually portray the story properly. And that's one great thing about the band. They don't rush, they don't try and rush through the story. They try and go into as much detail as they can to tell the story. And Danny he's an absolute genius when it comes to writing songs. He's very good at putting the songs together. He's a good wordsmith. He's good at telling a story, and he doesn't create tracks that are very repetitive. Like I was talking about a track the other day where I said they were using verses and paragraphs of the track 4, 5, repeating that same paragraph 4, 5, 6 times in a row. And I thought, I call that sort of lazy songwriting. And in this track, they do that bit with Apophis, reach dark office, Apophis, meet the goddess, or whatever it was. But, they repeated that twice, and then they used that same verse, but they changed it ever so slightly for the final repetition. And that's something that I said about that track I was listening to the other day. It's good when they sort of change it up just that little bit, and, this is what Danny has done consistently through the albums. He's tried not to be too repetitive, and because he wants to get the story across. Some songs don't even have like the traditional verse, chorus, chorus, bridge, chorus setup. Some of them don't even have a chorus. It's just as if he's reading a poem or reading a book to you. He's very good at writing lyrics. He's actually a very intelligent man. Although some people would argue against me on that. People like to argue against everybody on everything. Some people say he's a horrible person. Some people say he's an arsehole. Some people say he's a dickhead. I don't care. I think, I know he's a very intelligent man. He knows what he's talking about. He researches these stories clearly, so he can portray these stories through his lyrics. And that's one thing that I really like about them. Each album tells a story, and this is something I would always argue with people with. Back when I was in school, people would mock me because I was listening to heavy metal and it was just noise. And, I'd be like, okay then, have a look at this album. This tells a story. This tells the story of Countess Bathory. This is historically, this is a historical story. This is from myth and legend. This is, this album tells a story about King Arthur and this, that, and the other. This tells a story about whatever and whatever. Tell me, what have your hip-hop and pop albums done? How educational are they? What have they told you? Do they tell a story? No, they're just talking about bitches, hoes, and money. This is the argument I'd always make. The music that I listen to has meaning, it has depth, it has a story, rather than talking about mindless, vapid self-indulgence. And this is one of the reasons why I've always liked Cradle as a band. They've always told a story. I mean, Principle of Evil Made Flesh, I don't think that one actually had a story structure to it, if I remember correctly. And Vampire, I think, was sort of heading that way, and then they came out with Dusk and Her Embrace. And from then on, it's been pretty consistent with each album telling a story. And, that's just something I really enjoy. And, I really enjoyed that. I've spent more time talking about their back catalogue than I have this actual track. But, I like this new track. Like I said, it feels like it's sort of heading back towards older styles. It's sort of clawing back some of that grandeur that I said had been missing in their more recent music. It's heading back towards, like I say, Damnation and Day, sort of almost tiptoeing back into Midian. So, I really liked it. I'm really looking forward to when this new album comes out. I'm looking forward to hearing more of this album because, like I say, Up to this day, you know, I have gone out and consistently bought every Cradle of Filth album because I really enjoy their music. You know, they were the second ever gig I ever saw, you know, second ever band I saw live, and that must have been back in 1998, I think. It was round about when Cruelty and the Beast came out. You know, and I've seen them live 2 or 3 times since then. There's, in fact, on they did a DVD for oh Christ on a Bike, what's it called? They did an EP just after Cruelty and the Beast, and I can't for the life of me remember what it's called. But when they did the DVD of that, there was actually live gig footage at the from the Cradle to Enslave. That's it. They did the Cradle to Enslave EP. They released a DVD along with it, and you know, the live footage from a gig on there is actually a gig that I was at. At one point, if you look very, very hard, you can actually see me there. But you know, I was like 16, 17, 18 at the time. I think I was about 18 at the time when I went to that gig. You know, it was like the second ever gig I went to. And it was insane, you know. So yeah, can't remember how I got to that part of the story, but you know, I've always loved the band. You know, that track, like I said, sounded fantastic. Really enjoyed it. But I'm just waffling and rambling now, so I'm going to leave that as it is and move on. So if anybody would like to suggest a track for me to react to, then please do so. By all means, you could drop a comment in the comment section below, or message me on my Facebook or my Instagram, or you could even message me through my Patreon, where you could help to support this channel, which would of course be a massive help to me, since every piece of content I upload to this channel gets demonetized the instant it hits the channel, which is a bit frustrating, but you know, it is what it is. There's an option in Patreon where you can get your suggestion jumped to the front of the queue, should you so desire it. There's a limit on how frequently you can do that, and that's just to be fair to people who suggest tracks through more regular means, such as YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram comments. And if you do make a suggestion through those more regular means, do know it could take me a while to get around to that suggestion. But I do write down every suggestion I get, but, you know, I get suggested so many that, you know, my list grows faster than I can record the videos. But like I say, I do write them down, so it should get done eventually. Can't promise that it will, but it should get done eventually. It just might take me a while to get to it. Also, MetalHead Reacts is a proud supporter of the Sophie Lancaster Foundation, a British-based charity whose goal is to put an end to hate crimes. And one of the major facets of that is hate crimes against people of the alternative culture. And that's something I believe in very, very strongly. And it's something that gets very widely ignored. It sort of gets brushed under the carpet and treated as not a big issue. And that's something that really, really needs to change, because every day, all over the world, people from the alternative community are getting violently and brutally attacked just purely for the fact that they listen to alternative music or wear alternative fashion. And, you know, we're not just talking about insults being shouted or getting shoulder rammed as you walk down the street. We're talking about real brutal, violent crimes where people are getting hospitalised, sometimes with broken limbs, and sometimes even more life-threatening injuries over something as petty as their taste in music. You know, every day we hear about all these other hate crimes like sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, religious hatred, ableism, etc. We hear these on a daily basis. From the most heinous and violent of these crimes, where someone is brutally murdered because of the colour of their skin, because of their religious beliefs, or because of their sexual identity, down to the most petty and pathetic of these crimes, where some entitled white woman is calling the police because a person of colour is, you know, having a picnic in a public space. You know, we hear every facet of these crimes every single day in every kind of media. But we never hear anything about people from the alternative community getting violently and brutally assaulted just because of the music they listen to and the clothes that they wear. You know, the last time there was widespread talk about this was 14 to 15 years ago, when Sophie Lancaster and her boyfriend Rob Maltby were violently and brutally assaulted by a group of 5 or 6 people who beat them, kicked them, punched them, knocked them to the ground, and stamped on their heads so violently that they both ended up in comas. Now, Rob Maltby, he thankfully survived this attack. He was in a coma for about a week and a half, but he did thankfully survive. Sophie Lancaster, on the other hand, she was in a coma for 13 days before she succumbed to her injuries and she died. This young woman was 20 years old and was beaten to death just purely because this group of small-minded people couldn't handle the fact that she liked something different. They couldn't handle the fact that she dressed differently. Now, when this happened, this was all over the news, as rightfully it should have been. And, you know, over time, as all things do, you know, other news stories came in and it sort of faded into the background, which is fair enough. But the thing is, in the 14 to 15 years since that's happened, we've not heard anything similar since. But I know for a fact there have been several hundred, if not several thousand more similar cases to that, but nothing's been said. It's just been ignored and brushed to the side. Just a couple of years ago, there was a young woman in Scotland, not far from where I live, she was running a charity event, and during the night she had to go back to her home, which was about a 5-minute walk away from where she was hosting the gig. And in the time between leaving the gig and getting to her home, she was assaulted twice, again by a group of people, 5 or 6 people, again, brutally assaulting a single person. Twice. Within mere minutes of each other. And again, beaten, kicked, punched, knocked to the ground, and violently kicked and beaten more. Now, thankfully, she did survive the attack. Someone, you know, came along, sort of put an end to it all. But she did, thankfully, survive the assault. But this wasn't in the news. Nothing was said. You know, this was a young woman. Again, she was about 20, 21 years old. This is a young woman violently, brutally assaulted by a group of people, and not a word was spoken about it. If this had been racially motivated, if this had been religiously motivated, if this had been homophobically motivated, this would have been everywhere. There would have been public outcry. This would have been all over the news. But no. This was a young woman from the alternative community violently and brutally assaulted by a group of people, nothing. Now, you can guarantee, if she had died as a result of the attack, then this would have been in the news, there would have been a huge public outcry, people would have been weeping, going, oh my god, this is such a tragedy, how can this sort of thing happen? But that's just it. They will only react like that if someone dies, and that is disgusting. It is unacceptable. We shouldn't have to wait for someone to lose their life before this gets spoken about. We shouldn't have to wait for someone to die before something gets done. And this is what the Sophie Lancaster Foundation is all about. They want to bring more attention to the fact that this sort of thing is going on, and that it is a very big and very real problem. You know, I can't count the amount of times I myself have been attacked just because of the music I listen to. My friends and family have been attacked because of the music that they listen to and the way that they dress. It's unacceptable that this sort of thing carries on and just gets ignored. And the longer we ignore it, the more these things are going to happen. And the sooner what happened to Sophie Lancaster is going to happen again. And that we just can't let that happen. We can't allow what happened to Sophie Lancaster to ever happen again. But the longer we keep ignoring it, the more likely it is to happen. And it's only a matter of time before it happens again. Something needs to be done. So if you'd like to find out more about the Sophie Lancaster Foundation, there is a link to their website in the description below. You can go over there, find out what they're working on at the moment, find out what their overall goal is, because they can explain it a heck of a lot better than I can. And if you can help them out in any small way, obviously don't feel obligated to do so, but if you can help them out in any small way, whether it be a small donation through their website or even something as simple as one of these Sophie wristbands, you know, you've got these ones as well. They've got a whole bunch of other really cool stuff over on their web store, you know, but the smallest amount can make the biggest difference. And the sooner we get more people talking about this, the sooner we bring more attention to this, the sooner we make people more aware of the fact that this is a very big, very real problem, the sooner we can help to stamp out prejudice, hatred, and intolerance everywhere. But I'm going to leave that as it is for the time being. Thank you all very, very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.